Hello and welcome back to Torchwood. This week we've got fairies and... You know what? Can't even be bothered to introduce this episode. It's that appalling, and it's pretty much killed the excitement and love I expressed for the first half of this series in my opening review. Do you remember what I said about the writing team being mostly passionate and going on to create some great things both inside and outside of Torchwood? Well, this is where we get to the person who didn't make that statement. I have no idea what Peter J. Hammond went on to do, but if it is anything like his two Torchwood episodes, then I'm glad I haven't seen it. He wrote this episode and next year's episode from Out of the Rain, which boasts an excellent performance from the incredible, if underrated, Julian Bleach, and has a few nice ideas, but is bogged down by the desire to replace the lack of faith and interest in the idea with a forced edge. This is what is present in both stories, where the idea itself is obviously plain and dumb, so the writer just includes things you wouldn't and shouldn't put into a series aimed at a younger audience, so it looks from the outset that the contrast works. But it really doesn't, nor does the addition of these ideas explore anything to do with the death of children in From Out of the Rain, or abuse of parents in this episode, but we'll explore that later on when we get to the appalling final act, and don't worry, we will get there. But first, let's start at the beginning of the story. So the episode begins with Jack and Gwen attending some fairy conference with a mad old bat hosting it, who I had zero interest in from the beginning because of her unrelatability due to, well, believing in bloody fairies. The episode also tries to have a similar stunt to what it did in the pilot, where there is something we don't know about Jack in this case, how long he's been in Cardiff, with it implied to be recent, but then obviously this woman did not go out with Jack's father, despite it treating it like the fact it was Jack is a twist. They also try for it to be a twist that he has lived throughout the Second World War, but then it doesn't land because they said beforehand that someone called Captain Jack Harkness went missing during the Second World War. And yes, I do know that this was someone that Jack stole the name of anyway, but this wasn't known by the audience at this point and not revealed for several episodes. The conversation between Jack and Gwen about his dad also came off as really obnoxious. The only bit of this episode I think worked at all was the scene in which Jack found Estelle's body in the woods. The death itself was oddly staged and only here to contrive this moment, but Jack finding her was in fact a really nice moment as he wipes away all of the jokes and bravado as he realises that he is going to be holding everyone he will ever love like this, like he did with Owen the first time, as well as Tosh and Yan too. This scene brilliantly furthers Jack's arc of slowly coming to terms with the fact he is immortal, as the reality of it comes crashing down in some of the most beautiful ways possible, and this moment is no different, not really, to that, but again, it is really short, and nowhere near as good as some other moments because of the length and the fact it doesn't really tie itself to the rest of the episode. Jack as a character really falls short in this episode, as other than that isolated moment, he doesn't get much of a showing. I mean, the scenes in concept of him trying to find a way to spend time with a woman he loved long ago is nice, but it really isn't something you can put into practice in a high-paced sci-fi crime drama. Maybe if Jack had been investigating the fairies and discovered this woman he has been visiting regularly and that she's dead, then it could have led to him explaining how he knew her and giving him a more direct emotional involvement in the plot, which hadn't really happened before now. It kind of did in Cyberwoman, but then that was planned in a way this murder would not have been so much. John Barrowman's giving it his all in this episode, as he always does, but the script doesn't really give him that much to work with. The ending tries to, but Jack allowing someone to die in order to save millions of others is a trope which happens countless times across Torchwood, but doesn't really actually work very well until Children of Earth, due to it being in the most tragic circumstances. Regarding the other characters, the episode seems to present them weirdly. I'm not sure if it is because of the focus on Jack's storyline and that girl in her home life, but I can't remember a single thing that Tosh or Owen say in this episode, other than the ending where they blank Jack for what he did, which is a very understandable reaction in all honesty, but wasn't really given the attention I think it could have needed. As for Gwen, we learn that she studied fairies in school, I guess, and I'll be honest, the stuff about Houdini and Conan Doyle were not things I was aware of, but the episode doesn't elaborate on them, and instead we get some pretty bland relationship stuff, with her having her house broken into and feeling like her home life was at risk. A perfectly decent reaction, but then she does work in one of the most highly dangerous places in the world, and she's shocked and terrified that her home was broken into. It's not like a relative was killed or anything, which would have warranted the feeling of fear she gives off, but in this it just feels forced because of the fact they're just bloody fairies. She was dealing with a killer cyborg last week that wanted to rip her family and every person in the world to shreds for the sake of unity, and she didn't say something like this at all. The inconsistency with the writing in this series just to contrive drama is ridiculous and near painful to watch. The actual concept of fairies doesn't work either. I can't remember their deal at all because they were bland, but the Torchwood team appears so inadequate and bad at their jobs because of the terrible way they deal with a threat which kills bad people. I mean, seriously. The thing with that petals in the mouth just made me burst out laughing because the episode seems to think it's haunting and terrifying that you could die because you're forced to eat flowers. A fate worse than death, apparently. The bit with Jack and his army mates in that train as well, the visual tint over the display makes it look like a parody from a kids show. And there are so many shots and moments which seem like to treat themselves like they're haunting and disturbing, but they're not. They're just forced. And I need to talk about the bit with that pervert as well because it makes me so uncomfortable to watch. After he dies, like I said, the episode seems to treat these deaths like they're haunting images, but then I was happy to see someone who liked doing something so repulsive with the innocent die a horrible death after living in fear for so long. They wanted me to feel bad or scared when his body was found, that they did a pretty terrible job as they made him literally one of the worst people imaginable. I understand why at the beginning they chose to include him because the child was being followed by someone who wanted to hurt her, and the fairies are meant to kill anyone who harms the chosen one. Man, that was such an odd thing to say out loud. And this would be a good place to start, although why didn't they just kill him off there? I don't understand because there is no reason to keep him alive after this point, other than to show the fairies can get them inside of a locked room, which easily could have been established with another character. And then, of course, we get the crowning achievement of the pile of crap that is this episode, which is the travesty that is the story of the Chosen One. Christ, the name itself sounds like it is from a 10-year-old's novel about a dragon hunter or something, and not an adult crime drama which is literally trying to explore themes of abuse. The story didn't know what it wanted to be, and thus came off incredibly disjointed and disconnected. The child actor is also really annoying and unconvincing, but that's hardly a new thing. It's been an issue with TV and film for many a decade, so I can't blame Torchwood for that. But then there's the whole thing of the mum and dad's relationship, and the episode opens with the father figure, or the stepdad, being late to pick her up. And at first I thought the story was trying to do a character arc about this guy wanting to be a parent to this girl, but constantly messing up. Similar to Homer Simpson in the episodes where he actually is a good character and tries to connect with his kids. I generally thought the episode was going to go in that way after the first 10 minutes, as there's a bit where she says he isn't her dad, and he tells the mother that she never tries to talk to the two of them, suggesting maybe he wants to actually connect with her, but she has to come this obsession with alien fairies, and he has to confront his inadequacies in order to become a father figure. But then the episode seems to drop this all of a sudden, and out of nowhere he's insulting her and saying that her dad left when she was a baby because he saw what was coming. Okay, so he's a dick to her and needs to overcome this in order to connect with her. Would it be nice if he had set this up earlier, but let's see where... Oh, okay, he's abusive. He treats her like a slave and beats her, calling her a bitch in the final 10 minutes of the episode. I know he was a dick to her earlier, but there was nothing to suggest he was abusive to her, and the episode clearly only put this in the final 10 minutes because I've remembered it was trying and failing to be an adult crime drama, and chucked in abuse at the last minute to appear like it is. If they wanted to explore this theme, then that is absolutely fine, and I implore them to do it, and it could have led to some really interesting ideas, but because we only see him at his worst in the final moment of the episode, the theme did not land at all. Also, the episode finds its tonal confusion again, as when the guy is killed, we are yet again expected to care and feel for the mother. No attention was ever paid to this relationship, so we don't know if he was coercively controlling her, or if he did love her and just hated the fact her child was in tow as well. The woman overacts so much as well. I mean, a reaction's natural, but the acting is just so weak. It would have worked so much better if the episode's two main storyline focused on the Torchwood investigation and this mother's struggle to connect with her husband and her daughter. But then out of nowhere, we're just forced to care, despite not even knowing her name. And it is so poorly written, because I'm expected to care about the fact that an apparently abusive dad is dead, and the stakes of this story are that everyone will die if they don't get the child, and that just conjures up a whole host of questions, like why this girl in particular. And I think they're hinting at the fact this girl lives in an abusive home and was therefore manipulated by the fairies through a way out, but of course they don't say this, and they don't say why they want her in particular, so that doesn't really work. Because these stakes were created last minute, they do not work and just create a load of plot holes. I get the impression this was just written as he went along and didn't look back over it once after he finished. Credit where it's due, I like how the mother is so broken that she collapses into Jack's arms. Like, it was a nice emotional moment, And it sold Jack's more human side, and John Barrowman is fantastic in that moment where he's just staring and on the brink of tears. Seriously, what a great actor John Barrowman is. The moment on its own works, of course, but it would have been so much more impactful if we had learned more about this woman as a person, and if Jack's emotional torment had been linked to something he had actually done over the course of the episode. The final moments of the story where the girl speaks to Gwen and thanks her through a poem had me bloody cackling. The scene is so obviously trying to be dark and mysterious and ambiguous, but because so little thought was put into this, and that we know for a fact the girl is either a fairy or dead, there is no ambiguity whatsoever. This episode is abysmal, and an embarrassment to the franchise of Doctor Who. I would take comfort in the fact I never have to watch it again, but of course, Hammond wrote another episode for the second series, which has several of the same problems. He would have been better suited to writing a creepy episode of the Sarah Jane Adventures, as some of the ideas in his next story would have worked considerably more in a show with stories that work because they are isolated and not linked to some character and plot-based narrative. This story is filler and has no consequences whatsoever. I cannot understand why episodes like Day One and Psy Woman get so much hate and this story is ignored because it isn't even so bad it's good. The plot is inconsistent, badly thought out, and borderline insulting, as well as the character work being bland or contradictory, and the entire thing is so badly put together it comes off like a first draft, which is rarely ever a good thing. This is stereotypical Torchwood with its forced edge and darkness, and the only good thing is that it wasn't obsessed in showing the sex and thankfully didn't make the fairies sexy, but then it was disgraceful in its inclusion of serious issues related to sexual assault. So I'm going to revoke that single point. Thank God I never have to watch this episode again because I just can't stand it. Now, I could make a joke of saying, well, what could save the show now after something so bad, but you're going to get tired of me repeating that gag, as the whiplash and quality regarding Torchwood would have me doing it every goddamn week. Plus, you all know what next week's episode is. It's time to go full in with not just a good episode like Ghost Machine, but a genuinely brilliant and amazing episode which I could not wait to review. See you all when I review Countryside, even though it does have a dumb name.